perspective too, in that, and I mean, obviously we've been doing this at SBOM and medical device for a while.
Sure.
But concentration risk is huge. So, I'll give you an example. This is not necessarily broad-based, in COVID, during COVID-19, there were many major manufacturers of vaccines, pharmaceuticals, who were reliant on a packaging firm to package the vaccines. That firm got taken out by ransomware. Huge impacts to vaccine distribution during the time of COVID.
Security within the
Yes,
supply
so
chain.
yes, exactly. And then geographic risk as well. So,
Yep.
and then we're looking at like in Shanghai, which is shut down. So just incident response, general incident response. I mean, there's a shortage of supply of contract fluid, so people can't take images without that fluid. So there's another component to supply chain risk that I don't think we think about too often in cyber, but it has huge impacts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
So
that was actually one of my three. So my three were the cyber impacts on physical just-in-time supply manufacturing. The reason I thought about this was because the CISO and Nestle told me about one of the folks that makes flavorings for one of a single source in Germany, factory ransomware attack.
Yeah.
Put the entire global supply of Kit Kats at risk. And a very personal thing to me. Then there's purchased software packages.
Right.
And then there is all the software you build yourself.
Yeah.
And the consumption of open source.
Yeah.
Those were my
Yeah, and absolutely, I think relate to all of those. If I have to throw in one more, it's about the chip to cloud supply chain. And I'm a VLSI guy. I spend a lot of time designing chips in school, and probably you can relate to it. Right? You literally can change the outcome of certain things down at the chip level by adjusting the variance within the systemic chips, and that aggregate effect you won't know until like it's all assembled together, and that's very much a risk. So
and that's a risk behind any CISO's
That's
desire to
right.
Oh, yeah, how do you want to say it? Supply chain and the physical world is super fluid. It's very fluid things. But if you don't have supply, someone else does. And so if I've spent all my life working with you to develop hardware bill of materials, software bill of materials, wait, we got to change because we're grabbing stuff from this supplier. It's no different. One's Broadcom, one's this, one's Qualcomm, one's MediaTek, but it can make all the difference in the world to what Val was pointing out. And I think that's a problem that is super hard to get your arms around because it really affects business resilience. And I can tell you, all these little companies are on the same bucket of that. A freaking ribbon cable could be a supply chain component issue that is gone with that.
And the truth is, this is a space where, I think banks, as an example, are usually viewed as the forward in this space. But this is a space where banks really haven't thought about it in general, and it's much more something that like manufacturing has. So, or it's like if you're in defense, pharma, I mean, every component that goes into everything is exactly known and tested, which is why trying to patch something in those environments is so difficult. The places where we have the best view of supply chain, because we know every damn component, is also the place, because of that rigor, patching is almost impossible. But that's another day. But yeah, the manufacturers have that much better down than.
And it's geographical based, where you're manufacturing from, and to Val's other point, also geographical based of where the product is being shipped to. Baby formula is a perfect example of that. And you always have unintended consequences that no one sees coming on that side of it. It's there. And it's a big thing. We've gotten so far, what is it? I think we're up to 43 attacks from our supply chain side being taken out by ransomware in the last 6 months. And 70, greater, almost 80% of those we had to discover for the supply chain people.
For your vendor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nothing says any more
That's
more
scary.
Yeah.
on that side of it is like, you're having problems. And they're like, no, we're good. Yeah, you are. They're like, no, you're really not. We're bye. We won't talk to you again anymore. You won't be able to send me an email. So I think it is a huge issue, but it's not something. It's one of these. We have a group inside of our the parent group that's just focused on supply chain and trying to get it. And there's so many moving parts. There's so many different regulations across countries that are trying to do the right thing that it is, I don't want to say chaos, but maybe controlled chaos would be the better word. Because what do I do first? What do I do? Which one do I pull at this? And everybody's scared because we've had these issues in supply chain, counterfeiting, tamper resistant stuff before. You need to do this. Okay, well, this doesn't work. You need to do this. Oh, this doesn't work either. Okay, put a holographic sticker on it. Oh, they figured out how to count. We have a holographic sticker. Now what do we do? Oh no, they just went to the guys that printed the holographic sensor and said, hey, print us a couple thousand more of these. Just as you get it around this, it is going to be the same thing. And I think it's one of those things that you have to get in front of, or at least start with, because it's not going to be anytime soon. And if you haven't started with, you're just that buying time. It's going to take you. It's 2 years down the road. Guess what? You got 24 months. If you haven't started it, it's still 24 months ahead of you to figure all this stuff out.
Yeah. And I think considering the three angles, at least those three angles that we talked about, like getting on the physical side, you got Maersk getting hit by ransomware. I mean, Evergreen getting stuck sideways is a different thing on the Suez Channel, but Maersk getting ransomware and stopping the entire flow of trade becomes another supply chain issue, which is the third angle that we talked about. But at least we got maybe 30 minutes or so here. Let's at least address the ones or talk about the ones that we can get to, supply chain of the software.
My name is Nitin Mehta. I run a private company called Color Tokens. In it, we do a lot of work with US Air Force. And they have two kinds of supply chain problems that they have come up with that are quite interesting. One is, and we haven't mentioned here China, but they are much more worried about China, both from the getting the military intelligence and then the trillions of dollars worth of IP stolen on the commercial side. So very, very concerned about that. So the first one has been how the joint fighter F-35 and all of the design work was stolen, not from the Air Force net, but they had given to either to General Dynamics or to Procurement or one of those who gave it to their supplier, who gave it to their supplier, to MIT. And somewhere along the line, Chinese got hold of essentially all of the stuff. So the Chinese joint fighter that has come out is pretty much identical to ours. And billions of dollars of the stuff got stolen. So one of the projects we're working on is how do we protect the supply chain through the supply chain and what remains secure. And we think we have a good solution for them. Out of 60 vendors, we are now down selected to 2. So we'll see what will happen there. The second one is even more interesting. Outside of Salt Lake City, they have an Air Force Base called Hill Air Force Base. It's about 1.7 million square miles. It's huge. It has Minuteman missiles, it's ICBM, F-35s are there, B-52s are there. And in those, a lot of the problem has been that Congress has not been giving them money to give them new weapons. So in 1950s, when Minuteman missiles might have been given, it had a 20-year life. And when 20 years ended, they gave them another 20 years, saying, sorry, no more money, stay with it. So now 3 or 4 life extensions of all of these weapons, now many parts are not manufactured. And in that millions of square miles where the missiles are, the person has to go down 6 stories down, by hand write down the IoT data, because they dare not connect the IoT to digital IT infrastructure. Because if they did, then if Chinese got hold of it, they will know the status of readiness of these missiles. So they actually scavenger the part by taking one or two, we don't know how many because that's on the secret side, they're on the unclassified side. They write that after 2, 3, 5, 6 weeks, the data goes in. And when general says what's the readiness of my fleet of different kinds, they don't have the real-time answer. And the amount of work that gets done is incredibly hard. So we have figured out how to keep the OT and IT secure. That's also one of the areas. But I see, as we say, since all supply chain security is not free, there are many, many, as you pointed out.
Yep, and I think, we just added that's right. I mean, there are so many commerce is a trade of exchange of value across the supply chain, and that's where the difference comes in, right? We are so much used to the physical side. This room is probably more on the cyber and software and technology side, but those two worlds are kind of colliding now with requirements that are probably similar but not quite compatible in terms of the solutions that we have, right? So bringing this discussion back to what we can address probably in this forum is how do you secure that access and to the access to the technologies that we have and track at least, right, where we're getting stuff from. So Mark, I'll give you
So interesting about that. I was thinking when we were talking about war and peace, like what is an act of war? Is it systematic stealing of all intellectual property of information? But we were talking about how can we help organizations protect their supply chain? And I mentioned that the Business Resilience Council that is a multi-sector approach. One of the things that we're thinking is that organizations, whether it be a large manufacturer, whether it be a large bank, where we have many thousands of vendors, how can we connect them to the security teams of vendors and create those?
if they have a security team.
If they have security. If they don't, also how do we, again, just enhance the maturity of that vendor pool? I think the Business Resilience Council is one way to do that and create this connectivity with organizations and with their supply chain, with vendors, with their suppliers, and create that all in one information sharing body. So that's one thing that we're really thinking about hard and how can we implement that, and should we be working with large banks, large manufacturers to go down that road.
I think that also needs to be done in that scale, because then you are talking about a volume of many. It's the consumer or small medium business effect that comes in. That you have to address the needs of a broad swath that may not have the capacity. They might appreciate. Now there's a little bit of appreciation of the issue that's there. Of course, they don't have the capability and forget about the capacity. Right? How do we address that together? It's probably
Energy industry, the large distributor who has a large team of threat analysts, and they have the community organizations maybe under one umbrella, right? So they're benefiting from the value of the whole organization. Same thing in the financial sector, how do you make sure that your vendors benefit from your large team? And to your point, you're the one reaching out to your vendors and suppliers saying, hey, you have a problem, you got this.
okay. Thank you. I'll go to Jim and then over this table.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and take it maybe with somewhat of a narrow scope related to software and bill of materials, a lot of these areas, but I think we're going in completely the wrong direction in terms of vulnerability, discovery, notification, tracking of this. If you look at the amount of technology we use, we started using when the minor CVE program started 23 years ago, and the amount today, and look at the number of vulnerabilities, we're going completely the wrong direction. There's so much out there that's underlying. It's a combination of a lot of different things, and certainly national security and cybersecurity being one and the same, the stock happening that's happening for cyber offensive capabilities, crime and every place else. But yet we still have very manually curated approach, which we rely on, which is what DHS funds, and that's considered to be somewhat state of the art. And we can focus on that area, and that's also, I'm sure, Pandora's box. We have a huge increase in the amount of vulnerabilities that are out there, and we don't have the ability, I understand, to ingest that and mediate. We've got to start moving that direction, because vulnerabilities in aggregate are out there, and we need something that's more on demand and more crowdsourced in being able to identify, get the identifiers, enrich the information about those, and lead that into more remediation processes. But vulnerability is just a huge one for me.
Well, a quick follow-up on that. And if I to draw parallels between, like this problem can be seen in so many different ways, perspectives, depending on where you're coming from. At CSA, we took the NIST framework as I was shaping up, and then collaboratively put together the shared responsibility model, and that gives a little bit of understanding of who's where, who's playing where, at what level. Probably that's something that we could look at, right? That provides a lens into, from a business angle, this is my supply chain. From a software angle, this is my supply chain. From a physical supply chain, these are the components. And if somebody's looking at it, making a decision or funding a decision or influencing something, can provide a little bit more constructive, approach to that. Right. So I think that's something that probably needs to be done sooner than later.
I mean, I think you can take and break it down to a lot of different areas where, okay, let's look at embedded systems, and then let's go drill into a lot of different types of them. What can we do to get more state-of-the-art on demand there? Certainly in cloud, and the mashup nature of it, and the software building materials. There's a lot of things we can do with that better. Making it easier for vulnerability researchers to go get identifiers for what they're doing might take some of the friction out of this. Dan Gear, who was at one of our private meetings, he would say, hey, we should take the approach of the comp relative to the silver market. Let's have virtuous people pooling money and outbid malicious actors for some of this. I think we can break it down into different areas.
But we solidly need a framework in this space. Thank you, Jim. Norma?
One of the things, whether it's large, medium, or small organizations, you're also going to have to change the culture. Because the ability to understand, literally, do you know who all your suppliers are? What are your sourcing? Are they actually connected into the CISO world, or is it just the business unit that wants to do what they've been doing the same way for 20 years? When we help companies try to map their supply chains, there's a huge disconnect between the security world and an organization, and the people are just want to still rush first to market. So changing the culture, right, connecting those up, doesn't mean that the CISO is going to take over, doesn't mean the GC is going to take over, but you actually have to put those together. The other piece is we have trusted supplier programs for counterfeit. Trusted supplier programs, a lot of them are still just paper exercises.
It's not, that's, most of them are all just, hey, check boxes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
100%.
yes.
It's 100%. It's a check the box. I'm going to give you, here's my little form, you send it back, and there's no authentication or validation. That's what people are saying. Even counterfeit programs are the same at this point. So I think when we look at these issues, we have to look internally as well within organizations to try and bring things together. And that'll take, you mentioned 24 months on something. That still is a huge problem for a lot of organizations.
There's so many things I want to say.
Yeah.
and I'll apologize to everyone for this. So all this just makes me think we're just a bunch of damn lazy people. All right, because I'll go to your vendor management plan. This is what you would describe as a solved problem. I can tell you, I work for one of the biggest, most complex firms in the world. We knew every vendor, period, nonstop, right? Because there was no way for anyone to pay a vendor without us knowing about it, right? No vendor connected to a network without going through our security assessments. No data ever flowed to a vendor without going through security assessments. And it's just discipline. And it's not rocket science, it's just a question of management willpower, right? The reality is when we think about like the part of this that's the purchase products, the SolarWinds problem, right? That again is just laziness on our part, right? It's a failure to do things that we've talked about in the security space for years and years. Simple things like network segmentation, all right, and other things. So SolarWinds was a big deal only because, quite honestly, all of the customers of SolarWinds were damn lazy in how they implemented it in their environment. The hardest thing to me, I think, is really where you have your own internal development teams and how they consume open source in their development process. Right? To me, that is the hardest thing because that's really, and this is, I think, a cultural thing, that really is about how you create a culture and a governance process and application development, which is really difficult because people care about money. You're going to be able to control that. The network architectures and CISO you can sort of control. When the people care about doing the right things, motivated by doing the right things, and building all the applications, building your software products, I think that's a much more deep-seated cultural thing, especially around GitHub, all the open source. And that's where I think that's where the true value of software materials comes in. Because some of the interesting vendors in this space are really helping you do the same kind of reputational risk assessments on the providers of open source as what we used to have in lots of other spaces. We've had reputational risk on IP addresses and all sorts of things for a long time. So there are vendors that are now approaching the SBOM space with the idea of providing you reputational risk scores around where open source comes from so you make smarter decisions. But you still have a huge governance problem.
And governance problem both in the industry as well as within organizations where still you have an enterprise architecture board and there's one security person sitting there and that's okay, that's done, and once that's done, you're ready to deploy, right? So how can we left shift that within our organization as much as we want to address the bigger governance problem that's in the
And that's where you have, and this is where, I want to go back to the very first conversation, workforce thing. Do you have the kind of workforce necessary, the skills necessary to go and actually work with all these software developers? I mentioned earlier, I had like over 2,000 people working in the city, right? I had 100 of them that were called TSOs, Technical Information Security Officers. Their responsibility was our application portfolio. The problem was they had 7,000 applications, right? And so some applications had a full-time security person on them. But I remember when I joined, we did an analysis, and the worst case was there was one security officer who had 600 applications. That they were overseeing the security of. You can imagine the degree of due diligence that went into that process. It was like, accept. And so this is where we need technology to come help us bring control into the development process without bringing friction into the development process.
Yeah. So Mark, I'll come back to you, but Vandana probably, this is where I'd like to get your thoughts on, on the OWASP angle. And one of the, you're talking about people or groups who have the expertise to influence this OWASP, one of those groups, right? And where do you see that democratizing that process from the security people all the way to the actual developers? Because they'll continue to build motivated by the product managers and the project managers, and then what the business is asking them to develop.
It's a fair point to say that what just Charles mentioned, that it's all about governance. 80 to 90% of the applications which are there on the internet, whether we accept it or not, they are all open source. How much code do we develop now? We don't do that. Very little code. Do we know everything about what we use? If let's say I'm working on my own website and there's something which is breaking, I would go to the internet, start downloading libraries or dependencies and start using it. Do I maintain the list of it? Do I know everything about it? Maybe, maybe not. And then on top of it, this very valid point which you mentioned about that he knows about the vendors, which is good. But do we know about every third party that we are interacting with? Maybe, maybe not. If we don't know, or if we know, then how did Lock-to-Shelf came into the picture? Everyone went crazy in December. I was on vacation, but it went so crazy that we were like,
All
on
called
calls
back.
and everything. We were only talking about that. Then why did it happen? Equifax breach. We still talk about that. It's been 5 years. And we don't just say that it's a patching, but then we name the company. So it's important that we talk about vendors, we talk about third-party binaries, we talk about all of that. First, it starts with the right culture and with the right hygiene. And open source organizations like OWASP, they can do so much. But what it can do is bringing on the leaders who can actually influence the organizations to do the right thing. Starting with whatever you have, let's go ahead and start documenting. Because if you don't have the right documentation, you can never work on the right things. If you don't know what you have in your house, like there are so many doors, so many windows, you're locking all the doors, but you're leaving all the windows open. What do you do? Would you say that thief will not come from the window, but will only come from the door? You cannot never catch hold of a thief. And similarly, if you talk about federal agencies, if you talk about the organizations, even the smallest of vendors, they are not secure, or they claim to be the secure person. So how do you deal with them? So let's have governance, let's have checklists. Okay, these are the people that we are interacting with. These are the teams that we are interacting with. And there's one point which you said that let's have responsibility of each team or each business unit to maintain their own supply chain security. But can we say they are technical enough to handle that? They have the right policies set for them to manage that. Now, from an OWASP perspective, if I can say, they are coming up with software supply chain guidelines or board, where you can test it out. But is it enough? I don't think so. We need to have right people security. We need to have mindset shift rather than just left shift or shift left. Only then we can do much. And what Richard was saying, that it takes 24 months, but it's just that it's going to be worked out in 24 months. You will say that I'm working towards it, but how much you are working towards it is again an important thing.
So basically, I mean, even though it's long term, you have to start somewhere.
You have to start
And
somewhere.
if you don't, you're late.
Yeah. I mean, we're late on so many things, so why delay it further?
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure you are on it. It's a journey, it's not a destination.
Yeah. And then it has to constantly get evolved within the organization. I think that cybersecurity is such a multi-dimensional problem. It's hard, if you're not in this industry, it's very hard to understand like what all the tentacles are, right? And what one thing can bring everything down. Interestingly, I had a very interesting job title at one point. It was called an environment analyst. And when I took the job, I knew what I was going for, but most of my friends were like, you did engineering to go do that. But what you just mentioned about the whole Log4j situation is that gives you like, what's your environment and how the software is going through that environmental influences from the code in the developer's laptop to where they got it from and where they're deploying to through multiple environments. So yeah, I mean, very interesting. But I think having the outreach from certain organizations such as OWASP and then again CSA and a few other organizations which are in this room, I think it's very important for that voice to come in to the practitioners, so the practitioners start implementing it downstream.
Even to add to it, just recently, a few months back, the US government actually announced or shared an advisory where they told the organizations to follow cybersecurity practices, specifically software security, and they highlighted software bill of materials as well, where you should have these things. Then only you would start claiming towards becoming secure, rather than saying that you're 100% secure.
Yeah, and what I'm really interested to see how that works with the larger governing bodies and associations, right? That OWASP and other organizations are. Right?
I'm
curious to see how that works with procurement offices.
Well, that's a great point.
I mean, I remember, okay, I'm gonna date myself. Back long time ago, the very beginnings of information security, there's a thing called the Orange Book. And there was this thing called C2 by 92. And that meant getting to a certain classification by a certain date. And it was a great slogan, but it never wound up in any procurement specifications. All right, and so all of this stuff about something raw materials is all fine and dandy, but until it goes into RFIs and RFPs, and it makes a difference in how people spend their money, it's just all fine and dandy.
Yeah.
Very true, very true. And who will procure from? And in many cases, it also, like, who will prefer vendors, what they can provide, how can we quickly get to, a procurement done? Because nobody wants to stand in the way. But
And who's your best friend in the cybersecurity? Let's hire them.
It's dynamic too, it's not like the code's gonna stay the same for a day.
Yeah.
So guess what, is it this SBOM, is it tomorrow's SBOM, is it
Yeah.
next week's SBOM? All that's gonna continually change.
Yeah.
Especially in the cloud environment today. Yeah.
Yeah.
It changes every time someone uploads.
So I think that at the intersection of who the stakeholders are, I mean, the stakeholders being the technology owner or the product owner for that particular track, and then procurement leader. I mean, if you think about even the directives that are there, right? You got SBOM, you've got CMMC. CMMC is the procurement angle. SBOM is a software technology angle, and where those two intersect.
I think there's a lot of different things, and I think to bring up Log4j, if we were following reputation-based risk, no one would have ever implemented Log4j ever on that side of it. We all saw it, and it's amazing when you see some of these companies and it's like, we do not have anybody to be able to code for logs. Really? That's what you're telling me at this point in time. We're going to use open source, then roll our own. But I think it's some of the areas, and it's a struggle that you do have to start with identification. It's like anything else. I need to know what I have and what I don't have. But then it's back to the same thing. Well, start small. Like we chart how many lines of code does the business use? How many is it ours? How many is it someone else's? That gives you a good idea of like what my risk exposure is at some level, shape, or form. But we are almost at the anti-inflection point because people are trying to go to the code faster, code more, no code, low code kind of adoption rate, and we're trying to go, wait, we need to look at the code so we can figure out what's going on. Well, those are in different segments, and there is no developer, well, okay, maybe there's like maybe 10 or 15 that are paid to write secure code. They're paid to deliver by Friday their package, and I'm done, and I'm incentivized by that on that side of it. And until that changes, you know what? You're going to be at subject matter. And there's lots of, we do programs to try to make people's code securely and everything else. And it's a hard sell because they're really not incentivized to be able to do that on that side. But there's so many things that are around that you just have to, like I said, one, get started, but it is how you're going to orchestrate this in your environment. What is your biggest risk? Do you do it for everything? Do you do it for your mission critical apps? Do you trust the worlds of Microsoft and Google that their code is good? Where do you start and stop? Do you start with Amazon's marketplace? So all those things, are they vetted already or not? We deal with suppliers that we get vulnerability reports weekly from, that they have vulnerability in their code we need fixed. So it's not something that's there. It's like, this is the way, this is, unfortunately, if you use the COVID analogy, that this is COVID, you have to live with it at this point in time. It's not, there's not a win on it on the other side of it. It's going to be around for a while, get used to it and move on. And I think this is the same thing, is that you need to know what you have. Now, what you do with that afterwards is the organization that's there, and that's where we have the leverage to push on that side of it. Your due diligence is to know what you have. What you do with that information afterwards, that's where the values are going to come.
True. So we got I think 5 or 7 minutes. So Leah, I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, off what Charles was saying, is we, have started doing the same thing with all of our vendors, is they need to have we need to see the score, service score. And then, when it comes to renewing contracts or reviewing, in that term, we ask for it. Now, some of the small businesses, some can opt out and say, can't do it, but that's more of the smaller vendors. But with the smaller vendors, then there's some funding that we give so that, because we want to keep them, but we need to make sure that if you're working with us, you have to show us the level of security.
So,
And that does help.
and I think that the balance of trade typically sometimes drives that, right? What are you buying? How critical is that, and what kind of investment you want to make into that? Because as a vendor, you're buying something and paying in exchange. What kind of additional margin you want to plan into that? So very true. Okay. Mark, how would you
So,
then?
Few points. So, one, it is possible to deploy secure software rapid pace. I worked for about a year with the GSC organization when I was at KPMG. It took a year of politics to deploy a solution that did secure software development lifecycle where testing was automated and embedded in the deployment process. And it can be done, and it's something where now they're deploying software in 2 weeks that was much more secure than what they were deploying on 6 basis. I think to earlier points about vulnerabilities, I think one of the major gaps in vulnerabilities is vulnerability analysis is that we're not prioritizing things by the way they're being used by the threat actors. So the things that are in use should be the ones that are popping up on the list, even if they're 5 years old or 10 years old. They should be the ones that are getting the higher priority, getting attention, as well as the ones that are most critical. There's a tension, I think, from like a CISO, right? You're trying to sort of rationalize the number of vendors that you have, trying to reduce the number, because complexity.
Good luck with that.
Complexity causes.
When I left, we had 14,000.
Yeah, but similar
But
number.
there were only I think 3,000 that we were in the scope of our security program.
Right. Yeah, so the complexity is risk, right? But also you need some complexity for redundancies. Even with organizations that you think do their security really well, we talked about the major cloud providers. If there's a way that you could implement in multiple cloud providers your critical services, then you want to maybe invest some extra funds to do that thing, so that if one goes down, you still have the.
Not like the cloud providers have ever gone down or had any vulnerabilities or issues before.
We have a choice.
So you made the.
Yeah.
Positive thinking.
Yeah. All right. Good job. Good deal. Norma, I'll give you the last word for this session.
That's an active duty. On the whole bit of procurement, because I think that's a really important point. The federal government is finally putting, theoretically, it's big where its mouth is, but the implementation of Executive Order 14028 is going to require SLM, right? Which is going to require everyone to meet a certain definition of critical software. I think is really interesting and important, but whether or not they actually have the capability to enforce those requirements, to put out a clear rule, I think is going to be really interesting, right? We're going to have to change the federal acquisition regulations and ours. And even CMFC is just a control on classified information. It's just such a small portion that I think at some point DOD is going to go beyond that. I don't know that will help, but I think it's also going to push out smaller entities who are no longer going to be able to meet those requirements as the federal government. Larger companies are going to have to help smaller entities, and that's my.
Yeah, very good. Very good. All right, so I think we have arrived at the conclusion of this program. I'm sure this could have gone on for hours and maybe days. But thank you for all the insights and all the great points made here. This catalyzes so many different actions, I would say. Hopefully not just stays in this room, goes out, and you are able to share more from what you learned in this particular forum with your stakeholders, with your customers, with your providers, and then put the collective defense ecosystem together. As we started the day a little bit gloomy, you can see the sun coming out. Probably makes for a very great, outside reception. So our next program is the October Summit, which I invite you all to join. It's going to be a amazing exercise. The summit 26th to 28th of October. If you've got anything else that's not as important as that one. But this is the first time we're actually going probably about 10 times the size that we have done. Typically, we do Cyber Summit, invited guests who are part of this, and the members, they come together to, have a little bit deeper discussion on areas that we all care about and also work very actively. But San Antonio has actually set up a really amazing team. The City of San Antonio, Visit San Antonio team, UTSA, Port San Antonio, and all the partners there, National Security Collaboration Center, SIMANI, everybody is excited to have us there. And when I say us, this room and the extended community. So please do. We are also, inviting diplomatic missions to the city. So their attaches are all involved. So hopefully we can all work towards making this 33 people room to 300 and then times 3. So we're looking at about 1,000 attendees there. This is also for the first time we're opening up space for vendors and partners so that we can fund it. It's an exquisite, arena, probably one of the most advanced. We just did the Air Force. As you can see, the Army Navy game that plays out is with the esports game for the Army and Air Force just last 2 weeks back. Captain Factory is there, another great innovation, engine for Texas. So please, make your way to Texas. Plan for there. We plan for some really good entertaining, sessions, but also entertainment around the city. It's got a great culture to share. So as much as you contributed here, I think that contribution just goes even farther along.
What is the Alamo apparent for this discussion?
Alamo City it depends who you ask. I mean, it's Alamo City. It's also the military city and the cyber city. So the city aspect is moved here, but the 3 adjoining areas and perspectives will probably make it even more meaningful. So welcome you all to join us in October. Between now and then, we of course got a lot of work to do from the industry side, and hopefully at some point we can get to deepen the conversation within our organization or in our institutions to understand what are the different layers of cyber, as much as broad and varied it is, but also democratize across the business, across the technology and product teams, who are critical to this conversation. And all the work that you're doing, and when Raj worked with Nick Taylor on the purple book code and the teams that have written the book. So a lot of work I think we're individually doing. Collectively, let's put that together, showcase that in San Antonio. I'm sure Black Hat, we're going to make a pit stop there, do some work. But I invite you to enjoy the rest of the evening as much as you can with us. And if you are looking for rides and all, we'll probably just coordinate some of that. There's not a chance of having the Uber flexibility here, but we will get you back to town one way or the other. We also want to have a class picture. We do that with Pride every year. So welcome you to be, as they're going to move this side aside. They're going to come back to this room. For the next 15-20 minutes, I think they want us outside. You want us?
Actually, they've given us an upgrade. So they've got the patio set up, the bar, the fireplace is going, everybody's invited to go outside.
Awesome. Great deal. That's what we came here for, right? Not to be stuck in this room for 4 hours. But thank you again. Amazing day, and thank you for all your contribution. I'm sure this is 4 hours. Thank you.